So we got up to Daf Ayin Hey Amid Beis, and we're almost finished with this Agadata. So we're up to Vayishtechu. That's about, I would say, 10 lines down from the top of the Amid. Ayin Hey Amid Beis. The first word in the line is Yamin. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the pasuk in Bamidbar Perek Yud Aleph, and the Torah says regarding the Slav, you know, that bird that came down from Shamayim to give them meat to eat. Vayasfu es haslav, hamamit asaf, asara chamorim, vayishtechu lahem shatoach svivos hamachn. It sounds like they spread it out. Omrei shlokish al tikre vayishtechu, don't interpret it as they spread it out, the way it's written. Ella, read it as vayishchatu. Wow, that's very heavy. It means that as a result of their complaint and their demand for meat, they deserve to die. Now, exactly why shchita, this is called midah keneged midah. They were asking for basar taiva. And the halacha is that during the time of the 40 years in the Midbar, they're not allowed to eat basar taiva, meaning meat for the sake of the pleasure of eating meat. They're only allowed to eat the meat of karbanos that are brought in the Mishkan. And that's a sugya in Chulan Adaf Tes Zayin Amid Beis. So we have now an Isser of shchutei chutz, of shechting something outside of the Mishkan. You were not allowed to shecht an animal during the period of Midbar outside of the Mishkan. And if you did, it had the status of shchutei chutz. So the punishment fits the crime. For the crime of shchita, there will be shchita. Then the pasuk says, Vayishtechu lahem shatoach. What does that mean? Tana, we learned in a brayso, Mishmei Rabbi Yeshua ben Karchal, Tikri shatoach el shachot. Malamid sheyared lahem Yisrael im haman davar sheton shchita. The pasuk is coming to tell us that the slav is a davar sheton shchita. You can't just kill it and eat its meat. You have to shecht. Rebbe has a different drasha. Omar Rebbe v'chi mikan atolome. You think that this is the source for the halacha that the Slav required shchita? V'alo kvar nemar, it says in a pasuk in Tehillim about Bnei Yisrael in Midbar. Vayamter aleihem ke'afar she'er ukechol yamim of kanaf. The Slav, which is called Vayamter, that Hashem brought it down from Shemayim, is called Of Kanaf. What is Of Kanaf? Like its wing. For Sanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rebbe Omer. And Rebbe is now quoting a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh in Dvarim Yud Beis, Ki yirchak mimcha makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha lasum shmo sham v'zavachta mibkarcha mitzoncha asher nosan Hashem lecha kasher sivisicha and then v'achalta b'sharecha b'chol avas nafshech. So we've never found that the Torah commands us on shchita. In other words, what exactly is shchita? So from this, we're going to derive Shenitztave Moshe al Haveshet v'al Akona ve'al Rov Echad B'of v'al Rov Shnayim B'behem. So what does it mean? Nitztave Moshe. Nitztave Moshe is another way of saying Halacha LeMoshe Misinai. Not exactly, but something very similar, meaning that Moshe Rabbeinu had an oral tradition that he received at Har Sinai that was not recorded in the Torah itself. And these include the halachas of Shechita. So halachas of Shechita are part of Torah Sheba'al Peh. It's nowhere in the Torah itself. And within the context of learning about Shechita, Hashem revealed to Moshe Rabbeinu that all you need is the following. In the case of a bird, all you need is Rov Echad Be'of. In other words, there are two simanim that have to be cut, the kana and the veshet, and you'll go ahead and decide which one of the two simanim you want to sever, and that's fine. Now, whichever one you decide, let's call it the kana, all you need is rov kana. We have a similar halacha in Behema. We have to shech both the kana and the veshet, and there you'll need rov shnayim, most of both of the two siman. But in the case of an oath that only requires one siman, then it's halacha of rov, but it's a rov of one siman. Whichever siman you decide, do you want to shech? So we have Rov Echad Be'of, and then we have Rov Shnayim B'Behema. So in a Behema, we have to shech two simanim, the kana and the veshet, and once again, Rov of these two simanim is sufficient. So we see clearly that Moshe Rabbeinu got a tzivui for Ophos, Shechita of Ophos, because we just finished saying Echad Ba'of, or Rov Echad Ba'of. Now the slav is an oaf, it's a bird. It definitely needs shechita. Again, you need shechita of an oaf of rov, simon echad, but you need a shechita. So then what does the pasuk teach me when it says shatach? So once again, just to summarize, we don't need the pasuk shatoach to teach me shechita. We know that an oath requires shechita. Even rov of siman echad is enough. Ela ma talmid lomar shatoach. So what is the pasuk shatoach? Can't be telling me shechita and oath. Lami sheyored lahem mashtechin. It came down from the heavens in flat layers, one layer after the other. Now, Siv, the Torah describes man as lechem min hashamayim, uksiv, but another pasuk says v'haya tamo kitam l'shed shemen. So what is it? Is it lechem or is it shemen? Ksiv. Now we have a third pasuk, and that says Taimo Kitzapichus Bidvash. So it means that the time of the man is like honey. Om Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Everyone would taste that which is appropriate for his age bracket. L'na'orim lechem, l'zkenim shemen, l'tinokos dvash. So the young children like something very sweet. That's what they enjoy. And they'll taste dvash. And the Na'orim enjoy lechem. The Zkanim, the elders, I guess they feel that lechem is a little too heavy on the system. So they will eat shemen. Or shall we say the tam of the man will be like the tam of shemen. So this is not what I'm familiar with. I was always taught that every individual would decide what he wants to taste. Here it seems like he's working with categories, tinokos, neorim, zkenim. But it's so interesting to me that the zkenim are not excited about dvash. Now, dvash is something sweet. But actually, I know of many people who feel they don't want, they all of a sudden, the same foods that they loved in the past, now they say, oh, it's too sweet for me. The elderly person loses an appreciation for something that's sweet. Okay. I'm going to ask that, with your permission, we fast forward. And as I mentioned to you many times, I leave myself the option of going through the Agadata, not going through the Agadata. Okay, I don't know. Okay, let's take a look on Daf Ayin Vav, which is the first Gemara after this Agadata. And you'll see it towards the bottom of the Amud. You'll notice that the lines are thin and then they get wide, then they get even wider. And if you look in the widest of the lines on Ayin Vav, count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. You'll see 2 dots towards the end of that line. If it's easier, you can count up from the bottom of Ayin Vav, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 lines up from the bottom. Now, let's keep in mind, as we go through this Gemara, that the Mishnah opens up this chapter by telling us that there are 5 categories of Inu. and that includes Achila and Shasiya. And then we have Rechitza, Sicha, and Ni'ilas Asando, and Tashmish Amita. Hani Chamesha Inuyim Keneged Mi. Where do we find in the Torah an allusion to these 5 categories of Inui? Amar Rav Chizda Keneged Chamisha Inuyim She Batorah. Not once, not twice, but 5 times the Torah repeats Inui. And he mentions one word from each of the 5. For example, he starts with the word uve'esar. And the Torah says, Be'esar lachodesh hashvi hazem mikra kodesh yalochem v'nisem es nafsho seichem kol malach lo sas. Number 2, Ach be'esar lachodesh hashvi hazeh yom kippurim hu mikra kodesh yalochem v'nisem es nafsho seichem v'kravtem ishe lashon. Number 3, Shabbos Shabbosan hu lachem v'inisem es nafshel seichem b'tishal hachodesh be'erev me'erev ad erev tishputu Shabbos. Number 4, v'Shabbos Shabbosan hi lachem v'inisem es nafshel seichem chukas olam. Number 5, v'Yisol lachem lechukas olam b'chodesh hashvi'i be'esar lachodesh ta'anu es nafshel seichem. So no less than 5 times does the Torah repeat Inu. So the Gemara immediately asks the obvious question: Hani Chamisha Havu Anan Shisa Tanan. If we count Achila and Shasiya as 2 separate categories of Inu, and then we add Rechitza, Sicha, Ni'ilas Asandol, Tashlamita, 4 to 2, we get up 6, and presumably the Torah says that we have a remez, that's what we saw in Rav Chizda, for each one of the Inuyim. But if the Torah repeats Inu 5 times, how can you derive 6 categories of Inuyim? And the Gemara answers, Shasiya b'chlal achila. It's not exactly the way we said it at the beginning of the perek, that Achila and Shasiya, both on equal levels, they combine to form one of the 5 Inuyim. It's not exactly that way. It's really Achila, but when the Torah prohibits Achila, then Shasiya is also prohibited. And this is based on a principle of Reish Lakish. The Omer Reish Lakish minayin l'Shasiya shehi bechlal Achila. How do we know that when the Torah says Achila, it includes also Shasiya? Shenemar, this is in the Parasha Ma'aser Sheni, V'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha Now let's take a look. Where is this pasuk v'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha? In what context? This is in Parshas Re'eh, Sefer Dvarim, Perek Yud Daled, in the context of Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'aser Sheni has to be brought up to Yerushalayim and eaten in Yerushalayim. Alternatively, you can be poded the Ma'aser Sheni chutz Yerushalayim, take the most up to Yerushalayim, and then buy food in Yerushalayim. And the Torah says regarding that food, v'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha. You'll eat it in the Beis Hamikdash, or at least in Yerushalayim. Now, what's included under the achalta? Let's take a look. It says maser degancha, tiroshcha, v'yitzrecha, yitzharcha. Tirosh is yayin. The Gemara is going to reject that later, but right now the Gemara thinks that tirosh is yayin. Yitzhar for sure is shemen. So hello, tirosh chamrahu v'karile v'achalta. So the Torah says, do not eat wine. What do you mean eat wine? How can you eat wine? You drink wine. But the answer is that shasia is like a subcategory, if you have obviously told us, of achila. Now, we didn't have a discussion about yitzhar, which is shemen. We don't know exactly what the status of shemen is. But clearly, tirosh, right? There's a famous wine company here called tirosh. Tirosh is wine. And yet the Torah says, v'achalta. The Torah is teaching me that shasia is b'chlal achila. Now, is there a possibility of eating wine? Yes. Mimai v'dilma di achle al yidei anigron. You can pour wine into a concoction and make something called anigron, and that is edible, even though it's yayin, but it's edible because it's mixed together with solid food, and this was done for therapeutic purposes. There's a whole sugya in Ketzam Avarchim and Brachos. What bracha do you make on anigron? But again, it's a kind of food that you add wine to, and presumably oil as well. So now you have a taroves of a solid substance together with yayin or shemen or both. And that's why the Torah calls it achila. The Torah is referring to a kind of achila that applies to yayin when you mix yayin with other foods, and the concoction is called anigro. But if you had pure wine unto itself, then certainly the word achila would not be appropriate. You'd have to have shtia. And therefore you have no right to derive the conclusion that shtia is b'chlal achila based on this pasuk. The Omar Rabba Bar Shmuel anigron Maya de Silka. Now, I'm not sure what selek is. I used to think it was beets, but here it's called tardin, which is spinach. In any event, he takes the spinach and he cooks it. It's already cooked spinach. And the waters, the liquids that now have absorbed the tardin, the taste of the spinach, they are called anigron. Then there's something called achsigron. What's achsigron? Maya de kuli shilke. If you take any other yerek, any other vegetable, and you cook it, the water is called achsigron. So now the pasuk in Masechet Yoma v'achalta tirosh is no longer a valid source to derive the conclusion that shtia is b'chlal achila. We have to find an alternative source. Ela Omar of Acha bar Yaakov mehacha. Let's prove it from the following pasuk. In a case of a person, as we mentioned earlier, who wants to be podeh his Masechet Yoma out of Yerushalayim, and he can do so. Right? He transfers the kedusha Masechet Yoma from the peiros onto mos. Then he takes the mos and he brings it up to Yerushalayim, and there he buys food and mashke, and he eats it in Yerushalayim. And the Torah says, "V'nasata hakesef b'chol asher tavas nafshecha b'boker u'batzon u'b'yayin u'b'sheichar." So the Torah says, "V'nasata kesef," and what are you going to do with this money that you bring to Yerushalayim? You're going to purchase sheichar, beer, and then the pasuk says, "V'achalta sham l'fnei Hashem Elokecha." Sheichar is shtiyahi. In other words, there's no such thing as an anigron, where you take a solid food, and you add beer. That doesn't go, doesn't fly. So if the Torah says about beer v'yachalta, it means that shtia is b'chlal achila. Nimai, I'm going to reject this as well. Dilma achinami di achle al yidei anigron. The Gemara seems to be implying that there's something called a nigron made of shecha. Gemara says name. Shechar kosav, the pasuk mentioned shechar, midi de mishake. Shechar is something that's intoxicating. If you mix it with food, with solid, and you make an anigron out of it, then it's no longer intoxicating. You can't get drunk. So therefore, the pasuk must be referring to shechar ha-mishake, which is pure liquid. It's a beverage, and yet it's called achila. And this is a proof that shesiyah is b'chal achila. Now the Gemara says, unbelievable, that there's something that you could eat that's a solid, and you can get drunk from it. Vidilma, maybe shechar, is not shechar that comes from what we call a mashka mashakir, ella, but rather the intention here is dvela keilis. Now we're talking about figs, a certain specific species of figs that are called keila in the singular, keilos in plural. And if you eat these kinds of figs, you get drunk, you'll get intoxicated. And on that, the Torah uses the word achila, referring to this kind of a fig. The Sanya, we learned in the Brisa, achal tvela keilis. Now, a person is not allowed to do, a Kohen is not allowed to do the avodah in the mikdash if he's drunk, if he drank an intoxicating beverage. Is achal tvela keilis, or dvash or chala v'nichnas lemigdash on the top of Ayin Vav and Beis Chayev, he gets malchus. He violates a law of entering into the Migdash in that state of being. And we're interpreting the word shechar as dvela keilis, as this specific species of figs. Also, again, I don't know how much dvash you'd have to consume. He says that we're talking about med, which is a combination of mayim and dvash that are cooked together, and chalav, so the Torah says, Yayin v'shechar al teisht, ata uvanecha itach, b'va'achem el ol mo'ed, v'lo tamusu, chukas olam l'dorosechem. So the Torah opens up with Yayin v'shechar al teisht. Shechar means a davar meshakir, as we said before. It's got an intoxicating element to it. So we could say that the shechar in the parsha of Ma'aser Sheni, v'nasato hakesav b'chol asher tava nafshecha, and then it says biyayin uveshecha v'yachalta. It means dvila ki'ilis, and that's what the Torah calls achila. But a regular, glass of beer or yayin, that would not be considered achila. Ella, and with this we'll conclude, Ella Yolif Shecher min Nazir. In the case of Nazir, in Parashas Naso, the Torah says, Miyayin v'shecher yazir, chometz yayin v'chometz shecher lo yishte, v'chol mishras hanovim lo yishte, v'hanovim lachem v'yaveshim lo yochel. And the shecher, here, Lahalon, in the parsha of Nazir, is yayin. Because a Nazir is allowed to eat or drink anything that's intoxicating. He's only prohibited from the product of the vine. Is therefore af kan, here too the word shecher, in the parsha Masechet Sheni is yayin. It's not Vela Ke'ilis, it's Yayin. And even though the only way you can get drunk is by drinking it, nevertheless, the Torah calls it V'yachalta. So you see that Shtia is Bechlal Achila. Okay then, so that's where we're going to stop for today. And I'll take this opportunity to wish you a wonderful day.